Welcome to this edition of Backstage Pass with Lia Chang. I'm your host, Lia Chang. On this edition of Backstage Pass with Lia Chang, I'm taking you inside the AANHPI Community Night for SUMO, written by Mayi Theater Company's 2024 Toe Foundation resident playwright Lisa Sanaye Dring, and directed by Obie Award winner Ralph B. Peña. After the show, author Ryan Lee Wong moderated a discussion on masculinity, physicality, and its political impacts, featuring panelists Assemblymember Ron Kim, playwright Lisa Sanaye Dring, and SUMO consultant and co-fight director James Yaegashi. The complete cast of SUMO includes Kris Bona, Red Concepción, Akira Fukui, Michael Hisamoto, Ahmad Kamal, Earl T. Kim, Hank Lin, Haowen Liu, David Shi, Scott Keiji Takeda, Paco Tolson, and Viet Vo.
Stick around. So my name is Ryan Lee Wong. I am an author, and actually my novel, Which Side Are You On? This is a funny coincidence, was narrated by Scott Takeda, who played Akira this evening. He played Scott Takeda. So if you liked what you saw in this performance and you want to hang out with Scott's voice for like 5 hours in your ear, check out Which Side Are You On, the audiobook narrated by him. So on my far left, we're joined by Assemblymember Ron Kim for the 40th District. Any queens in the house? Plus some queens in the house? Yeah. James Yaegashi, SUMO consultant, the incredible SUMO. And Lisa Sanaye Dring, incredible playwright. So we wanted to have a conversation tonight about masculinity, physicality, and the political implications of those things. And I actually want to start it with you, Lisa. One of the things that was so impactful about this play was the way you really depicted that narrow line between tenderness and abuse, between a father figure and a patriarch. Can you talk about just how you got into this hyper-masculine world and got into the psyches of these men who are all struggling, to me, among other things, with manhood itself, with how to be a man?
Yeah, thank you. I started to write this play because I felt like I didn't understand men. And I was like, I don't know how to write them, I don't know what they're up to. And then it was like, picture me as a writer's colony, like listening to podcasts of like men talking about man things and being like, what are you doing? So, and I still feel like, I don't still, but I wanted to be curious about them. And I also wanted to look at the other with a lens of love and also criticism. And so I think if I am successful at engaging with those different sides, it's because my lens, I've asked for myself to have a lens that is varied as well. Meaning like, I can see some things that I'm critical of, but also some things I really admire and respect. And some things I'm really alienated by and also find so beautiful. And then also this process, like this text more than any other, I think, needed workshops and embodiment to find out what it was, because the fighting and the staging are so much a part of the meaning of the piece. It's not just a textual piece. And so being around these collaborators, many of whom are men, and women and non-binary people, have also given me such deep lessons in how masculine energy moves. So I think as I wrote the text, it wasn't just like, oh, the play is telling us what is going on. I'm also like observing how like men move together in a rehearsal space.
That's amazing. So that's a great lead to my next question for James. I was really struck by something you said in one of the videos leading up to the opening night, which was this play was all about getting people to drop their center of gravity. And one of the big themes in this play is just bodies. The power of bodies, what bodies represent, the bigness of bodies representing something. So can you just talk about, working with these very particular bodies and pulling off these scenes where each scene had so much emotional meaning and emotional weight?
It is a physical show, isn't it? And we cast phenomenally grand men to embody sumo, which is so close to the Japanese identity, which I think Lisa explained so beautifully throughout the piece. But I grew up in Japan, and my mother's American, my dad's Japanese, and my adult life has been in the U.S. And there's a stereotype of sumo as just like these big men bumping up against each other, and a lot of people, a lot of Americans that I've spoken with are kind of like turned off by the idea because they think, oh, it's ugly. They like it to see all that flesh on display or whatever. And that was actually a foreign concept to me, because my perception of sumo is just an incredible, what's the word? These, and Lisa says, godlike creatures, almost like these awesome men doing unbelievable things, with only their selves. They have nothing on except the mawashi. They're naked. The ceremonies that they do, like some of the like the chijos and the jodan no kamae, which they do where they open their arms like this. It's signifying that they have no weapons. They carry nothing but themselves. And so when working with the actors, there was like this, I wanted them to sort of own this magnificent gift that they have, which is these huge bodies. And one of the things that I talked, I think, a lot with them in preparation was that in the West, we have sort of this preconception of strength or physical strength that is like a reverse triangle. That's like very, very strong upper body, broad shoulders, big, I'm sorry, I'm like, big upper body, take it out. And then it trims down to like a narrow waist and whatever. And it's very reflective of Western culture, which is intellectual and kind of top heavy in how we relate to the world. As opposed to in the East, you look at strength as a right side up triangle. So the strength dwells in your center, and the closer you are to Earth, the stronger you can be. It reflects a very sort of, I think, fundamentally different way of understanding strength. And you see that very clearly in sumo, especially when you put Japanese sumo wrestling against sort of like international sumo wrestling amongst wrestlers who are trying to put on sumo instead of doing the things that the Rikishi do in Japan, which is live and just literally spend all day doing shiko, which is like strengthening the lower body. And I think the actors were totally game for doing some very, very difficult training. We spent 3 hours every day in rehearsals for 3 weeks to get them to sort of get lower and lower and lower and get in touch with the earth and their center of gravity. And consequently, being able to sort of really own the space. And I think they've done a tremendous job with that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I would love to talk more in a second about those differences you pointed out between kind of Western conceptions of masculinity and power. But first I want to ask a question to Ron. So, one strain I saw in this play was actually how masculinity and kind of like the power of sumo was actually very closely tied to nationalism. So like this myth of the Japanese nation coming out of this primal fight, right? And as a Korean American person, we know how bad that can go, Japanese nationalism. And so...
it's real, it's real.
So, and as a Korean American person, something I really learned about and studied is also that fine line between the violence of nationalism and the beauty of so many of the cultures and practices that come out of it. So I say this to contextualize the question for Ron, which is, a lot of your work as a politician and in the public sphere has been to really look at and examine and critique maybe some of the ways masculinity is being expressed in the political sphere, and I think we're seeing the very real effects of patriarchy, as a political force on the national scale. So can you just talk about, what you've observed and maybe where you see hope for different versions or ideas of masculinity?
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Ryan, for the question. I think it's an incredibly complex topic to cover in like 10 minutes, but I'll try my best. But if I have to kind of simplify it all and tie it back to sumo, is that we live in a society where people weaponize everything, including masculinity, to either punch down or punch up. And when you're punching up, you're like the main character in the play. You can do a lot of positive things, and when you center honor, integrity with masculinity, there could be a lot of strength in what we could accomplish as a community. But unfortunately, I think our politics, as we all know, is consumed by the rise of the strongman era, and it's like a competition of who could be even more toxic in their way of doing business. And when you are surrounded by that, we are drawn, I think, to characters like Akio, because it's very rare to see someone who will take a stand and say, no, I'm going to punch up at the make. And I've been to the Japanese facility in Japan, and even as a guest, you have to be on your knees and you can't make a sound. It's very, very strict the moment you enter the space. And for a character to say no to the main father figure and hit back, because we know that that doesn't happen in real life. And part of us, all of us, when we see injustice, we want to see it, and we want to experience it, but when you are a decent human being consumed by all this bad behavior, most of us don't want to muddy ourselves up in that manner. If that makes sense. And so we become just watchers and just protect ourselves and our circles. And that's what's happening in real life. So when we see this and we create this kind of safe space, I think it's time for us to find inspiration and understand that there is a path to punching up.
Thank you. That's beautiful. So another lens I have to offer to watching this play is, you know, I actually lived for 2 years at a Zen Buddhist temple, a training monastery. And the trickiest thing about watching this play is how similar it was actually to the Zen Buddhist training model. You got up at 5 a.m., you're sitting in the Zendo, actually focusing on the same place, but like very still. And hour after hour, the whole point of it is actually to break one's ego apart. Less abuse, thankfully, in our Zen Buddhist temple, but the same idea of like having this totalizing space, this totalizing stable that just pulls apart your egoic habits and allows you to do something you actually thought you couldn't do before. And one of the beauties of this play, I thought, was how Akio, you know, receives this very abusive training, and then at the very end, you know, tries to offer something different to the next generation. So my question, you know, I'll open this up to anyone. You know, what do you think of as training? You know, maybe your own training. How have you been trained? How do you want to offer training? Or maybe the question is, have you been in an environment that challenged you and actually felt like on the edge harmful, but you came out on the other side and you thought, I actually learned something very powerful from this experience?
I'm not sure if it was harmful, but this play is a cipher for a devotional practice, which for me is being an artist. So I think my way in, I think as an American, I'm not really sure if there are frameworks for devotion, for giving oneself to something so entirely and trusting the alchemy of the process to let it make you something different. And so when I saw this practice in person, I was like, wow, so moved by that. And then also it is what I hope to have done as an artist. And I think, you know, our practices can be like having a family, love, like being in community, just giving yourself to something that's bigger than you. In this case, yes, there are harmful and abusive parts of this world, and there's also such beauty in letting yourself become something more than oneself. So I'm not nearly as good as these people are at their jobs, but I'm trying.
Your experience in the Zen monastery, it makes a lot of sense. And you know, in Japan, martial artists and martial art, even Bushido, like the samurai way, was very, very closely related to the practice of Zen. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but I think there definitely are, you know, important parallels. And I've been practicing martial art for almost 25 years. I did judo for 6. I currently practice Aikido about 17 years now. And I think at the heart of a martial art is exactly what you're mentioning about sort of like breaking open your preconception of who you are and what the world is, so that you can truly be present with what is in front of you. It's very, very difficult to do, you know. And in the you know, arena or the field of martial arts, it's through incredibly rigorous and dangerous practice that you learn to do that. But I think what Lisa chose sort of as like the, you know, Japanese word of the play, masakatsu agatsu, it means true victory is victory over the self. And to me, I think that's, in a sense, what's essential in any practice, and also the key element that if it's lost, almost anything can turn toxic. You know, when we're so obsessed with me, we lose sight of so many things, and we're unable to actually truly be present. And I think that crosses sort of disciplines and areas of whatever. And so for me, at least in my martial arts, and how that I hope affects my life, is that it allows me a way to sort of continue to crack open those preconceptions that I have.
Yeah, I can certainly attest to what you're saying. I've recently started jiu-jitsu with my daughter, 6-year-old daughter. I'm in my 8th month, but it's completely changed my life. I just, my schedule is around training, and I entered 2 competitions already. But to your point, it just keeps me so in the moment. And it transfers not just when I'm training, but in my life as well. With my kids, putting the phones down and being present for every experience that they deserve for us to be there with them. And in an era where there's so much information, and even right now, if I dare you, the audience, to just pay attention to us for 2 minutes without thinking of anything else, it's impossible. Something will come to your mind. You gotta pick up your phone. I see that guy right there. You can't do it. So I think something like, whether it's meditation or martial arts, sumo, there's a through line, which is enjoy the journey and be present.
Yeah, something I think about often in Zen Buddhism is attention is actually maybe the most precious thing we can offer. So anything we can do to cultivate that, I think, is a really powerful offering to oneself and the world. Maybe my last question is, one thing I really loved and appreciated about watching this play is that it actually opened up and offered other ideas of masculinity than maybe the dominant ones we see in Marvel movies or in national politics, or name any kind of like pop cultural realm. And so my question is, this is kind of a personal, subjective question, but is there a character or a moment in the play that really particularly touched you in terms of opening up a different idea of masculinity, what maleness can be? And while you're thinking about it, I'll say karaoke. Incredible. And just personally, going to karaoke actually with my family, noraebang karaoke with my family as a young person, I was like, who are these people? I was like, Dad? It actually allows people to inhabit a different persona, and I think especially for many like male-identified people to just like break out of like, I'm a man, and just be goofy and playful and silly and do that for like 3 minutes. So my question to you is, was there a moment for you that really resonated?
James and I are going to be like, well, we know how it's made. I guess what came to mind isn't in the play, is just how much this cast takes care of one another. And a thing that I'm really proud about, and we saw it even in workshops, is that this cast forms a family. This play asks the cast to form a family very quickly. And one of the reasons why is, I think, because their safety relies on one another. Moving with each other, moving against one another for hours a day, you have to. But I also think it's a testament to the people that we've cast, their beauty. And so being able to both be a part of that and then also witness that, it's really special.
Man, that's such a great question, and I kind of love just how we see so many like forms of masculinity in the course of the play, and it's all that. You know what I mean? It's maybe it's a cop out because he asked what's the specific moment, but to me I think it's the cumulative effect that gets to sort of the yin and the yang, right? Like, and it's busting open the notion of the either or. You know, this preconception we have that there's masculine and then there's feminine, but maybe there's a world in which it isn't so, you know, divided. And I think for me, what's beautiful about this play is that I kind of experience like a lot of different forms of masculinity. You know what I mean? Like, if I can let go and just enter the story, it opens up a beautiful array, and I think I really love that about it.
So, yeah, I think the way that he owned his love and was able to say, I'm opting out, I don't care about, you know, I'm willing to take that risk and be judged. I think that, for me, it was like a very brave, you know, a moment of masculinity, expression of masculinity.
Japanese women relate to sumo. Are they as enthusiastic in their appreciation as, for example, American women might be about football?
That's probably a question for me. I think the answer is there are so many women who love sumo. If you tune into a sumo broadcast, you'll see women just going to see the matches, you know, in groups. And then they'll carry their favorite Rikishi's name, you know, on a towel, or they'll have like homemade signs. And I think, I think Lisa, you've talked about this too, kind of. But there's so much more to sumo than just like the collisions, you know. There's a tremendous amount of ceremony and history that go hand in hand. And with every explosive moment, there's also an incredible amount of stillness, you know, that's there. I mean, and when you go and see sumo, it's a whole event. But I don't know, there's something about it that is I think it's very, very non-analogous to sort of the ideas that we have about, like, you know, combat sports, if you would, you know.
It was referred to as a national sport, so that's
right, yeah, and that sense of history and I think ceremony, but also kind of they're idols. I mean, in a sense, you know. And so yeah, it's popular across the board. Yeah.
It's hard for me to answer that because by this time in the process, they are all me and my whole heart. So it's like, and I also, you know, I'm interested in complicating those names for things, right? Like that which we think is feminine. You know, while I also I do have ideas that I'm coming into them with, but really, what's so beautiful about seeing it embodied and working with these people is that it's like anyone you love, they kind of lose adjectives. You're like, they're beautiful and they're terrible and they're wonderful and they're petty, you know? And so it's like, I'm, you know, especially in seeing them be performed, it's like, oh, I've lost all that. And all I am is like, I love you so much. So I'm the wrong person to ask, but I'm gonna answer it.
One thing that really stood out to me that I wanted to share, I just want to shout out Mitsuo, like such a complex character, the head of the stable. And one thing that I realized in watching this play is that he's not only the father figure of the stable, but he's also the mother figure. And there are moments where I'm like, oh, this person is these person's mothers, and they all have to kind of make it work in this very particular social configuration.
To your question earlier about what surprised me or us, that scene of the, you know, my father's a fisherman, that language is very old, and it is, you know, my grandfather was a fisherman, and also my uncle, like, did have to wake up early to help out my grandfather, you know, like things like that, or my great grandfather was a fisherman rather, but We didn't find the place where it existed in this play until this time around. And I feel like there's this part of Mitsuo that I always saw that I was like, oh wait, I never wrote that. Like, I'm like, oh, and so this key scene, I feel like now in the text is like an adoption scene. And it's also like showing one's heart to someone. It's the moment where all of a sudden Mitsuo brings Akio in and then they need one another in this significant way. So I think in some ways that scene has been chasing the play around, and the play finally found it in the last 2 months.
How do you as a politician, do you as a martial arts practitioner, as artists and writers, how do you reconcile that part of the play is about softening that and the message of I'm going to give back at the end with what we tend to do as humans in cultures and societies?
My question exactly.
Yes, I'm just reflecting for a second. But it's
You can respond with Dan.
Can I'll try a little.
Okay.
Yeah. So one thing I would actually say that collectively for the last 500 years, we're actually just way out of balance. We're way towards the top-heavy triangle. We're way towards domination. We're way towards patriarchy, which patriarchy, by the way, I define as a system of domination. It's not just about men, actually. We're way towards a system that prizes control. And so while it seems like everything is tending that way, if you step back actually 30,000 feet and look at who we are as humans, we actually are much more complex than that. And it's hard to feel that way sometimes because these last 500 years have been really bad in a lot of ways. And so I think we are, and I think this is one of those moments. This play is one of those things that are kind of gently offering another way, gently pushing us back, gently reminding us of a more full picture of what it means to be a human.
I mean, politically, socially, this is something that I think about nonstop these days. And how do we get out of this? How do we find balance again in everything we do? And like, how do we be a strong man in power without putting up another strong man to take him out? Like, how do we model this out? Like, how does that work? When you rise to the top with violence and force and domination, decent people, why would they want to compete in this space? They resign, they leave, they do something else. So how do
They give back the grant.
Right. So in this scenario, and history has taught us, that's why we have so much violence, because people bring more violence to take out the top strong man, to ultimately with the vision of seeking that balance that we want. And that's what scares me the most, what's coming next. Like, very specifically, like, I'm a Democrat, I'm a progressive Democrat. Oh, you can clap to that. But our New York City response to the federal government is putting up our version of Donald Trump by the name of Andrew Cuomo. Like that's, and many Dems think that's good. Oh, well, we need a strong man like Donald Trump. We need our asshole in chief. That's literally what they say, internally. I mean, this is exactly what we're talking about. Like, but there are plenty of compassionate, balance-seeking, leaders, but the public is not responding to them in the way that they're responding to someone like Cuomo.
One last thought.
I'm sorry, because this is something I think about all the time. And I do think, before your question, you mentioned something about what we as humans need vis-a-vis masculinity. And I think, I see in this sort of hyper-divided society of ours, that there has been a co-opting of masculinity by those that would only use it in a toxic way, and who exert strength defined as conquering others, as Mitsuo would in this play. And I feel as a citizen, and I think probably as a martial artist, this comes out of it as well, that we need to reclaim the narrative of, because I do believe that masculinity is important. I mean, you know, I mean, it isn't a vital part of being human, but it's only being treated as this one thing that a very sort of like, you know, bullying group is saying what it is.
The alpha male narrative.
Right, right. But you know, the bully in the playground shuts up if he gets popped in the nose. And you don't have to be a bully in the playground to pop someone in the nose if they're stepping out of line. You know, there's this thing of like, I think in response to the toxic masculinity, we've lost this, we don't know what masculinity looks like in terms of like, what's the word? A balancing force in the world. And it's this notion of like, we can only see, like, my wife has a hard time, you know, watching martial arts because she's like, they're hitting each other, you know? And actually, there is a Zen kind of thing that when you're practicing a martial art of like, you have to like shed everything, you know, even the concept that there is an enemy in front of you. But to get there, to practice that is so hard, which is probably one of the reasons why we don't have that counter narrative, because it's extremely hard, you know, to practice that.
I feel like there's other questions. I guess Carl Jung is really all over this play in many ways. In many ways, I've written this because it's the other for me, like sensei people, people much larger than me, masculine people, and so, and that guy was just like really into Taoism, right? There's like older things that he was vibing with, but this idea of the other, like after World War II, someone asked Carl Jung, do you think we're gonna have a World War III? And he said, that depends on how much one wrestles with their own shadow. So I guess you're asking a systems question and I'm giving an interpersonal or personal answer, but I feel like for me, it's also like there's this idea of like, I've seen the other and they are us. And so where's the strong man in me? And how can I grapple with it? And then when I see it, yes, there's alienation from it, but also like, everyone's more similar than they are different. So I think, how can I grapple with these things that I think are really harmful, and then also understand that we all have that inside ourselves, and I too have seeds that I need to grapple with inside me. Grapple with that. And I think understanding it is complicated and not less than, like different kinds of vulnerability. I'm really moved by, you know, the leadership, Ralph, and the people who lead this space, how they encounter emotions and tension differently than me and like move through it in a different way, have a different rhythm. I'm also less afraid of conflict and tension now than I was before. And so letting those things, ruptures and repairs, be much different than me as a hyper-verbal person want them to be, I think has been like a deep balm to my spirit that I didn't know I was learning until like deep in the process, where I was like, oh, there's like a totally different paradigm here, and I need to trust that as just as valid as the one in which I'm comfortable.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for this edition of Backstage Pass with Lia Chang. Until next time.